Today's conversation is going to be with somebody who has some interesting experience. He's gone from being a pilot of a very fascinating spy plane to building communities, and some fascinating stuff has happened to him along the way. Welcome back to another episode of T-Rex Talk. Today I have a guest with me. Ray Simmons is his name, and we're going to talk about probably a whole host of things because you have a fascinating book, which we should talk about at T-Rex because T-Rex is a bookstore now and also kind of a publisher. We talk about books quite a bit, but also you have an interesting gun-related court case that you are in the middle of, somewhere in the midst of. But you also have an interesting military career with some fascinating stories from that. So where would you like to start? Where would you like to start our conversation? Book, court case, spy pilot. Where would you like to begin?
I don't know. I guess we can start with the arrest and the court case.
You are in Iowa now.
Yep.
So this all took place in the good old conservative Midwest. But can you break the story down for us?
Yeah, that's a good point. It really was surprising to me that it happened in the conservative Midwest, and so this was January 6th in Iowa, and of course it was extremely cold weather. It was like, I think it was below zero, and I think we had about 15 inches of snow on the ground. And it was caucus. It was the Iowa caucus, and so it was a big deal nationally. And and so I wasn't going to go to the caucus. Actually, I had not really thought I was going to vote for any of the people that were in the caucus. So I said, well, I'm not going to go. And then so I'm sitting at my computer doing some things, and I get a text from a buddy of mine who's going. He's actually a pastor in another part of the state, and sort of put a guilt trip on me, not intentionally, but so at the last minute I decided, okay, I'll go. So I've got all my thick coats on, the Carhartt, super winter coat and all that. So I step out the door and get there just in time, and I walk up and take a seat in the bleachers. It was at a high school gymnasium, and
which is where a lot of small town political activity takes place, is in a school.
Yeah,
some of the biggest buildings in our county are two school auditoriums, the two different high schools. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably a better use of the public schools than the primary intent. But yeah. So, and I really wasn't thinking about it being at school. I was thinking I'm going to go to the caucus, and the last minute, where is the caucus? Okay, so it's at the high school gym. So go over there and take my seat, and we get going. And then I'm in like the top bleachers, like really high up, and I get hot because I've got all this gear on, and so I take off my jacket, and then I take off my wool sweater, and then I realize I've got my gun on outside of the outside the waist, the belt, and the holster. And I was like, wow, I forgot. And so I normally wear my gun at home just for home safety. We live in a pretty safe town, but nevertheless, there have been some people that have come by our house, and we had kids and everything, so keep that on. But then I was like, oh well. Here were my thoughts. I am in Iowa at a Republican caucus convention. I'm probably going to be okay. I wasn't even thinking about the fact it was at a school. I should have been, but I just didn't even have that mindset at all. So anyway, after it was done, and I put my jackets back on and went and talked to some friends and stuff. And then I went home. And I was just relaxing with the family. It was about an hour later, and the police show up at my door. and there were three policemen and a deputy sheriff. And I opened the door, and I thought, man, something must have bad happened. And they said, "Hey, were you at the school?" And I said, "Yeah." And I thought they needed some kind of witness or something. You know, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that I had a gun. And they said, "Did you bring the gun there?" And this is where I'm embarrassed, because normally I do a good job at saying, "Okay, well, I'm not going to talk anymore. Do you have a warrant?" You know, all that kind of stuff that really, you know, you should do, right? You know, let me talk to the sheriff, all those kind of good things. But I was thinking, you know, it was a mistake. So I said, "Yeah." And the guy said, "Well, that's a really big deal, and you're coming with us tonight." So that was it. So off I went into the jail and was there for 3 hours. So that's what happened that night.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty, I mean, in some ways I'd say it's a pretty quick response for something that's not an emergency and there being 15 inches of snow on the ground.
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot going on around here.
That's true. Yeah.
And the other thing is Senator Ernst was there, and the policeman pointed that out, and he said, "Well, you know, with Senator Ernst being there, you know, it was even more important." You know, but sometimes I wonder if, like, these policemen even know that in Iowa you can conceal carry in the Capitol. It's no problem anywhere.
Right.
You can go in the governor's office. I don't know if it's the same way in Tennessee. Probably is, but.
Well, interestingly enough, you would expect that, but interestingly enough, that's one of the few places you cannot carry is in the Capitol, and there's been some conversation about that. And then this year we had an interesting conversation. Tennessee has a lot of small counties like ours that have a justice center that has a courtroom in it, but it's also where the county clerk is. It's where you go and you do a whole bunch of paperwork. So the Justice Center is a large building that a ton of stuff happens in, but you can't carry in the Justice Center because there is a courtroom in it. Now, court is not always in session. In fact, court is in session, not rarely, but many days out of the week. You can go talk to the county clerk, do business. There's no court in session, but you can't carry a firearm in there. And we're trying to tweak the language, you know, fix the law so that you're not allowed to carry loaded firearms into court, but inside of the parking lot, inside of the Justice Center, going to do DMV or vehicle registration and stuff is allowed. And so it is interesting how in a lot of these places where you expect there to be a lot of freedom, there's little bits and pieces of code here and there that are actually pretty significant.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you guys are pushing against that, though. Is it? I don't know if we'll talk about this or not, but it seems to me like the momentum is going in the right direction on a lot of these things.
Yes. Yeah, and it's fascinating. We got 28, 29 states that have constitutional carry, and so in many ways that is in Tennessee. In many ways, that has actually sort of slowed things down, where we go to different legislators and we say, "Hey, we should really change this bill because people are going to get in trouble by accident,
right.
not realizing they're not allowed to have a gun when they go talk to the county clerk." They know court's not in session. They know Judge Amy's not there. Like, they're not realizing that it is, you know, there's nobody at the metal detector, and they're not going through the metal detector, and there's no deputies there, and there's no court there, and there's no judge there, and they're not allowed to have this. And they're like, "No, it's fine because you have constitutional carry. Could we just not talk about gun laws every year?"
Yeah, but it's very. Yeah. I mean, it happens a lot. I mean, and so after I got arrested, I started looking at this, and yeah, it does. It happens quite a bit. People accidentally doing this. In fact, I think it was like 2 months after my arrest in Iowa, they made a law that if you go on school grounds and stay in your car and you have a weapon, then that's okay, because parents were going to pick up their kids and they got concealed carry in their car. So, they're doing it anyway. So they recognize that and changed the law. So, so
the other thing that I would point out is, you are not that I believe that you should have special treatment necessarily because of who you are, but you are not just a random Joe with a string of priors or whatever. You are a former pilot, a spy pilot who has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and defend the nation and have a bunch of security clearances and have done some interesting missions. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that you should sort of take into account as the court case progresses. So how are things going?
Things are going well. I guess it's been, I don't know, about 3-4 months ago. The prosecutor, who was a county attorney who lives just 3 houses down that way, and I can see his house out my window right now. He made the decision that they are going to drop the charges on December 2nd. So it's almost an entire year. So they're going to drop the charges if I go take a gun safety course. In which, you know, that was a deal where I said, I sort of laughed, you know. I mean, you mentioned the military. I mean, I've done that many times. I've had many of those courses, many of the marksmanship, you know, drills and all that. So I said, okay, you know, we can do that. I still haven't taken the course yet. I need to. Maybe I can come down and take on a T-Rex if you guys do it down there. But
I'm not sure what paperwork is required. We don't. We're not great at paperwork, but we can definitely take you to the range.
Yeah. So that's the deal. So it is going to be dismissed. So I'm thankful for that. You talked about my record and all that. The lawyer, you know, said that he was going to bring that in. He asked for sort of, you know, my list of, you know, medals and stuff in the military. But then also his other approach was just that obviously this was an accident. You know, he didn't mean to do that.
Interesting. Yeah.
One of the biggest, I guess, backlashes here was on Facebook. It's interesting. In my town, we have a pretty conservative town, and you know, I mean, most leaders are Christian. We pray at our city council meetings and all that kind of stuff. But there's this sort of this subculture here of God-hating people, and you know, they looked up some other things from me in the past that I had done, like bringing up laws against drag shows in our town and things like that, and kind of had a heyday of me, you know, there in the orange suits, you know, on Facebook and all that. But at the same time, there were so many people in the town that were, first of all, supportive, and second of all, thankful that I was actually carrying, you know. So and that's kind of what it is. So that's the status.
At the time of this recording, Donald Trump has survived 2 assassination attempts. So having protection at political events is a thing that people should be more grateful for. By the time this episode airs, who knows what the number will be. Right. But it's an interesting time that we live in for sure. So how is this affected? So the court case is hopefully coming to a conclusion beginning of December. But you are in a pretty small town, and you're there for a pretty specific reason. And if people want super detailed details, you have a book about confessional counties. What are you doing in Iowa? What is the goal? What is the purpose?
What our goal is to create local Christendom within 10 to 20 years, within 1 to 2 decades. And by local Christendom, we mean that our county will confess Jesus Christ as Lord. And then that would be a society-wide confession, but brought with representative heads. So that would be the pastors as the church, and that would be the fathers, you know, a representative group of fathers, and that would be the civil magistrates, you know, like we see in Nehemiah chapter 8 through 10. So, we are hoping to achieve that. There is a theological reason behind that, other than just general gospel advancement and crown rights of King Jesus. We believe that the Bible is very specific and calling for this today, not as a goal, but as a requirement for today. So we have a small county here in Iowa, and so I guess our church is going on 2 years. So for about 2 years, we've been on this project, and people have moved in, and we've been settling in and building the church and all that kind of things is sort of foundational. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do, is have a Christian county in 10 to 20 years.
Well, some people are going to say that sounds super weird, and that those even talking about the 3 spheres of sovereignty is super weird. But what's fascinating to me is there have been enough changes. I would say even recently there have been enough changes, even just over the last, say, 4 years. The number of people that I have seen moving out of cities so that they can be in a small county, so that they can be a part of a community. A lot of these people are not, they're not weird. They're not Christian nationalists. They're not trying to build something. They're not being as deliberate about what they're trying to do. They're just trying to get to a place where they can know people and be part of a community. And so that is just an incredibly fast-growing sentiment that I hear from people all the time, all over the country. And so the fact that you are being pretty deliberate about not just a general warm and fuzzy community with no definition to it, but trying to actually put something out. And has anybody in your county found this super top secret document, which is also available for sale, like on your website, and you have published and commented about that? Is that a thing that got brought up over the last year?
No, it hasn't, and I think that's probably because I've been pretty low key. I haven't been low key necessarily deliberately, but what I've been doing the past 2 years is really focusing internally on the church. I mean, we just really thought that is the most important thing to get settled, to get the foundation of the church right. And that has taken longer than I thought. And we are just now at a position where I think I can get back into more public ministry. But the podcast just fell off the face of the earth, and I hope to regen that here pretty soon. And then also I'm going to be going to Fight Left Feast conference and setting up a table again. Just trying to get back out there. So are you going?
Well, I will see you there. I will be there. In fact, Gabe has been bugging me to plug the conference on the podcast, so we'll do it now very organically. There's a Fight Left Feast conference down in Dallas, Fort Worth area, the very end of October. I'm actually doing something at the little pre-conference. There's always a business conference that starts before the real conference. So I'm going to be doing something at that, and then I'll be there for the big conference. So it'll be good to see you there. So T-Rex is, as everyone knows, a company. We're not trying to do a whole lot more than be a company, but we are doing more things than probably a lot of companies are. We do have a podcast. We have creating a bunch of different types of media, educational media that I think tie very directly to our products. And then we do try to do some political lobbying, talk about some of the stuff that applies very directly to why we're in business and what we want to accomplish in business and what we want to do for our customers. So I see them as all, a very neat, tidy, logical group of things.
Yeah.
But sometimes people think that it's weird that we're doing more than one thing. We're doing more than making a widget. We're doing more than being an online retailer. We're doing more than being a regular YouTube channel or whatever. And I think that some of those folks might be surprised that within our county, we're also pretty low key. Like, we've developed a number of relationships with folks, but we are far more far more active in Nashville during legislative session than in our local politics. The way that we've been involved in local politics is largely relationally, as opposed to just being at every meeting. And we've been far more obnoxious about state firearm laws than anything in our local county, and just trying to do as much building as we can here. I think that is probably a pretty good pattern to follow.
Yeah, it's the same with us. I mean, we're not. I guess it's not like we're trying to take over the county. That's not
right. Yeah,
that's not really the way it is. It's that Jesus Christ is already reigning over the county and over the whole world. And so, what a wonderful blessing it is to all of society to walk in God's ways. And so, we want to come alongside the people and show them, God's grace, God's law, and, a way to be blessed in this life and then have eternal life in the next. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It's, it really is relational. When we look at at Acts and we look at the way that the gospel was presented, it was presented individually, and it was presented societally. It was presented to individual people, and it was presented to the civil leaders. And so that, I think that's a model for us today.
Well, it's sort of easy for me to say stuff that I think you'll agree with because I have read your book. So that's, but this is something that I've been thinking about a lot and been talking to a number of people over the years, probably some of the same people that you've been talking to over the years. Mm-hmm. Just what is the work that needs to be done? What are the foundations that need to be recovered? What are the things that need to be built? What communities, what businesses, like what needs to be done at a community level, at a relational level? What is it that we need to actually be doing and building or rebuilding? And it's a fascinating conversation to have. And there's a bunch of different communities all over the country that are at different ages. Yours is a couple years old. Ours is 10 to 15 years old, depending on how you count it. I feel like we didn't really get much traction for the first 5 years where we were. We had the disadvantage in some ways of everybody who moved to this part of Tennessee about the same time that I did. We all worked from home. We all had our own businesses. We were all at some level of homeschooling. And so we moved here, and everyone knew that we moved here because it was a small town, but we were still kind of invisible there. Right. We didn't plug directly into local businesses or the school or anything like that. We arrived, everyone heard about it because everybody knows everything that happens in a small town. Mm-hmm. But then we were just kind of off the radar for a while. It took, if you're not interacting with people regularly, it literally does take years to build a relationship with them. And so it just took a while to get to know folks and being real deliberate about things like joining the fire department and trying to do things a little bit more publicly, making a little bit more of an effort to shop locally. These things are they seem like trite, simple, obvious things, but it is that slow and steady work that I think is really productive at building relationships.
Yeah, that is a challenge. It's the same challenge for us. The same sort of thing. We have, homeschooling, of course, which we believe is the best method of education according to the Scripture. And I might come back to that if we have some time. But yeah,
sure.
The public aspect, I think that is the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so what our plan is just like what you said, to get involved with the local stuff as much as we can. My son's in the fire department, and I think that he got that idea from you guys down in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we have businesses that we are trying to promote. One of our the men in our church, actually our deacon, started a local newspaper, and so we have a newspaper
Okay.
that's actually a print copy and it's free. And but it is a Christian newspaper that promotes the churches that actually are preaching the gospel in our area, that promotes the Christian businesses. We get some articles in there and stuff. So that's a challenge, is to be public.
Yeah.
Um, but just even going to the square, we go to the square. I know you guys do too there in Tennessee. Go to the square and we sing songs at the square. And just about every time that we do, there's some type of touch point with the community, somebody that we meet. We've had one person that is joining us now from doing that. Homeschool conferences, doing locally, trying to do some public preaching. That's one of the things that I think is really missing today. When you look at revivals in history, everybody says that it starts with prayer, and it does. It starts with prayer, but there's the other aspect of it. It's public preaching, and and so that's one of the great things that we have available to us here in this country, is we can go preach, and
Yeah.
so that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And it's something that I have, I don't know if struggled is the right word, but certainly been conflicted about over the years, because so much of what is wrong with the world in America is the federal government, or even sometimes state governments, are just in a lot more of our business than it really should be. And so one of the responses to that is, I just want to be left alone. I just want to do my own thing. I just want to be left alone so I could do my own thing. And there are verses like, let another praise you and not your own mouth. Like, it seems like the best thing to do is to be almost as invisible as possible. And culture has created this kind of idea, like something that is admirable would be to never talk about politics or religion. There's a whole bunch of things pulling me in the direction of, try to be invisible. And in some ways, I think it is fortunate that T-Rex is a business that it's not just a service, business to business type company. We don't just make widgets. There is a requirement to do some marketing. And the way that we want to do the marketing is with educational content. So I feel very much pushed out of my comfort zone, even having this conversation with you publicly. Having this conversation with you is not uncomfortable, but knowing that we're recording it and we're going to put it up on YouTube, and countless tens of people will see it on YouTube. And then hundreds or thousands of people will see it on other streaming and podcasting platforms. Makes it a little bit uncomfortable, because it does seem like society has told us, like, this is a private conversation. This is the sort of thing that you never talk about, especially if you are the one doing it, you don't talk about it, kind of thing. I think we need to push back against that in a way that is exceedingly humble, but bold at the same time. And it kind of reminds me of some of the stuff that the early church did, where they did preach boldly, and then they also met in buildings with the windows open, so that everybody going by could see and hear what they were doing, because they had something to offer and something to teach. And it's also sort of a difficult thing to say when it's not that we have something to hide, but I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff that's legal today that may not be legal tomorrow, and doing all that stuff as publicly as possible sometimes feels a little risky. Live streaming things that we are doing that are core legal key business practices at T-Rex seems like we're either boasting or we're doing something risky, and we shouldn't do it. And yet the transparency that we've had, is a number of people told us, is really encouraging. So anyway, I don't know what you have thought about that, because you are an extremely humble, quiet person, but you also have published a book in the hopes of educating and inspiring and equipping people.
Yeah, I I think there is a wise element to whatever you're doing to to see if something would be helpful or hurtful, as far as what you would say. So there is I think a wisdom in that, because what we talked about earlier, the relational aspect, you kind of want people to know you, to build to trust you before you start saying things, like no, for example, pluralism is unbiblical. That's something that is clearly unbiblical. Pluralism is unbiblical. Secularism is unbiblical. If you're going to say things like that, then you want to be able to, number one, have some trust with some people, and number two, hopefully have some time to explain yourself. And
Right.
So that's why I think that the best thing for us to do is to have longer dialogues, which is difficult because everything is going to shorter dialogues, right? Shorter video clips, shorter everything, sound bites and stuff. So I think that is our challenge. I think it can be dangerous if you just use sound bites without caution, because it can be misinterpreted and used against you and stuff like that. But the other thing is, whenever we have done stuff, and we haven't done a lot of public stuff, but whenever we talk to people and we do preaching or singing or things like that, there are, of course, some that are opposed. But what usually happens, I think the Lord works it out this way, is that overall it turns into a positive result. And so, sometimes I'm like, well, should we be doing this? Or should we put up a website? Those kind of things. And God seems to advance it. Now we have got, not necessarily us specifically, but Christians in my county do have opposition that has come up, again, on things like drag shows and so those kind of things do come up, but that's darkness versus light, and sometimes the fact that there is that tension is a good sign. Is a good sign that we're actually bringing the word to the society.
I think it is helpful. The thesis antithesis idea that we'll have both sides of an argument together, I think is really helpful for clarity. But I really agree with you on the need for longer form conversations, for longer articles, longer books exploring things. But yeah, the tendency of folks is, I don't have time to read a book. I got tweets to be angry at. It is a much shorter attention span, sort of culture that we're going into. But at the same time, speaking of thesis and antithesis, I also see there's starting to be some pushback against that. I'm starting to see people say, like, well, the tweets are fine for bumper sticker sloganeering, but I actually would like to sink my teeth into this a little bit more. I would actually like to spend some time getting deeper into the weeds here on this. I think that there are folks who have realized, that is a great way to communicate really simple, short ideas with people, or label things. If you already have the framework, or if you already understand the stuff, and communicating the bigger ideas takes time. And so one of the things that is kind of interesting and encouraging to me is that long form conversational podcasts are a thing. They are a media, I'd say they're a content module that didn't really exist in the past. Occasionally you would have talk shows that were longer and conversational than today's talk shows, but for the most part, podcasting feels like it's a little bit of a new thing. It's an or maybe a throwback to, audio cassette recordings of fireside chats between folks. Like, it is a relatively recent phenomenon, and I think it has the potential to be really helpful as an antidote to soundbite culture. Now,
Yeah,
I will warn
I
you,
agree.
we're going to pull some sound bites from this podcast, though. So
That's okay. That's
we're going to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the,
Yeah.
like Substack is sort of, imaged
Yeah.
itself as being, more for those people who are willing to actually read and actually think about, and I think they've done some things to sort of keep in that space. And, so I do appreciate that. And, yeah, so I agree. But I don't know that I've been as optimistic about it as you, but now I think you're convincing me.
Well, I forgot about Substack, but yeah, most of the long form articles that I've read recently have been on Substack. It's interesting how they have created a platform specifically for that kind of writing and attracted some good writers. Now, I do know that the audience at T-Rex is going to want to get into some military history because you have an interesting service record, and you managed to be around for some very interesting transitions. You were there in the early days of transitioning to drones, but can you describe a little bit what you were doing, what you were flying, some of the stuff that you're allowed to talk about?
Yeah, sure. I started off flying bombers and B-52s, and got to fly all around the world, and was involved in a number of conflicts. Some of them you could probably make a case for biblically as being just war. Most of them you probably could not. But it was a good experience. So that was the sort of the first half of my career, and then I transitioned over into reconnaissance in the second part. So I applied for the U-2, and so that was when was that? About 2006, and I got accepted to fly the U-2. And that was a very different way of flying. In the B-52, we had at least 5 crew members on every mission, and in the U-2 we only had 1, and so it was a solo job, and a lot of times you were really on your own. There were times even in the 2008, 2009, where we were going off tether, going into just places where there wasn't as much communication, as much airspace, things like that. So
Yeah.
It was really, really interesting. So yeah, I was really blessed to fly the U-2. It was one of those things where it was a physiological challenge because you're in the spacesuit and you're so high,
Yeah.
and you can get the bends and all those kind of things. It was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun.
That's fascinating. Now, the B-52 is a pretty ancient airframe. I think we're coming up on 4 generations of pilots flying the B-52 at this point. And the U-2 is also not what I would say cutting edge. Like when did the U-2 first fly? Was it the 60s?
Yeah, it was in the 60s. But basically in the 80s, they built a whole new fleet of U-2s. So it was based upon the 60s design, but it was a bigger airplane with a bigger engine in it.
Gotcha.
And,
okay.
Updated avionics, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's still overall old technology. But on the outside and the inside, though, you update the avionics.
Yeah, and I imagine super cutting edge surveillance packages that you can't talk about, and amazing reconnaissance optics and camera pods that are all very off limits for discussion.
Yeah.
But one of the questions that I have for you is, so it's an older design, updated in the 80s, and what were some of the reasons that you were still flying missions at that time when we have theoretically great spy satellites, and B, theoretically really capable drones everywhere? What was the reason for manned missions with this super high altitude plane?
Well, first of all, with the satellites, to get a a good image, then you want the low Earth satellites, the LEOs, so the ones that are going around, around the Earth. And so those have a set track, and they only come around, once a day. And also they have a set amount of fuel in them. And so, if you need to move it to go take a picture of a different place, then you can only do that so many times. So the satellites are not as effective as a lot of people think they are. Now we have the ones that are geosynchronous that are way out there, but they just can't get the clarity that you need.
Yeah, typically. Thousands of miles further away.
Yeah. Now the drones. So after I flew the U-2 for a while, I flew the drone. One of the drones. It was a RQ-4 Global Hawk. And that is also tremendous technology. I mean, the plane could fly for 24 hours. You could fly it from the other side of the world. You could be talking to guys on the ground from the other side of the world. So amazing technology. But those, at least when I was flying them, had their limits as well. The payload wasn't as much. They could oftentimes would go off tether, so you'd lose link with it. It was kind of embarrassing sometimes to say, I've lost my airplane. I'm not exactly sure where it is. So you'd have to pre-program things in so that it would stay in places that it's supposed to stay in. Also, the drones don't really save that much money. Because most of the money that you spend, believe it or not, is on personnel. And it took one pilot to fly the U-2, and it would take about 10 pilots to fly the Global Hawk. And the reason is because they did some human factors, study that said you don't really want to stay in this workstation flying an airplane for too long because you're going to lose your attention and span and everything like that. If you're actually flying, you're in the game, you're moving around, you've got some feedback from the airplane, you're engaged. But if you're flying, a video game, then it's harder for the human mind to stay engaged in as long. So what do? We would cycle pilots in and out. And so there would be you'd need 10 pilots to fly a Global Hawk mission, whereas one to fly a manned aircraft mission.
Interesting.
Having said that, there of course are a lot of advantages to the drones. You can go places where you're not as worried about human life, losing human life. You have more persistence. You can stay up longer. And of course the flexibility to be able to fly it. I mean, we could transfer that airplane from one air station to another station if there was a problem. So there's a lot of flexibility.
How long were some of your U-2 missions when you were by yourself, single cockpit?
Yeah, my longest one was 12 hours.
Okay. Yeah. Which is a long time, but is that in some ways, I mean, I can feel this, I can grasp this. It certainly feels like that would be in some ways less taxing than 12 hours at a desk in a room like this with computer monitors.
Yeah. I don't know if it's less taxing, but it's easier to stay attentive when your life is on the line. Put it that way.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's a fascinating can of worms as well, which is it's easier for the pilot to stay attentive when his life is on the line. It's easier, I think, to make certain decisions when the cost of running a mission is a little higher on the human side. I think people are quicker to ask questions about, as you mentioned before, just war theory or risks or dangers or things like that. It is, I think it is really easy to cheapen certain things with drones and automated platforms of different types, to where you're no longer asking the hard questions because the math isn't as hard anymore.
Yeah, that's now I didn't ever employ weapons from the drones that I was flying. They were just reconnaissance ones. But definitely when you get into employing weapons, I have friends that were in that community, and that was a problem, as a significant problem for them. They overall they've done really well with that. They do understand that lives are at stake, and they are careful, and they're well trained in laws of armed conflict. But you do have that factor in there, definitely. Another one that we talked about quite a bit is the propensity to have a provocation is higher, because you're not as concerned about human life. And so you're going to perhaps push a little bit closer to the borders. You're going to go into some areas where that they may have air defenses that you wouldn't normally go into. And so it can be something. You have to be careful with where you're flying the drones, because you can wind up provoking another country where you wouldn't do that if you had lives in the airplane.
Interesting. Yeah. There's another aspect to it, which I haven't given much thought to, but secrecy has upsides and downsides. And when you're at war, Sun Tzu has said that all war is about deception. You want to keep secrets from your enemy, obviously. But I think that there is a negative to keeping too many secrets from your own troops, your own guys. And I could be wrong, but I feel like drones allow you to keep more secrets. There's fewer people actually in the loop. It's easier to keep more secrets internally with drones. Do you think that's, is that a vibe that I get only from like watching weird drone movies, or is that a real thing in reality? I watched a bunch of drone movies recently as I was doing research for some drone wars videos I've been making on YouTube, and they all played into the dark secret. Like no one knows what's going on, and you will receive a phone call and they will patch you into a drone and you don't know where it is, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I suppose that is there, and especially for special operations and things like that. And many of the reconnaissance aircraft that we have are larger jets with a bunch of people on them, doing different doing different roles. So I could see that there would be more sharing of information with things like that, but. And I don't know. I haven't really thought. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. The big thing with intelligence is not gathering the information. It's pretty easy to gather the information. It's hard to process and then disseminate the information. That takes takes longer, and to actually interpret it and say, is this important, and who needs the information and things like that. So that. That's probably a little bit more difficult with a drone than an airplane, because there's something about being there. There's something about having the Mark I eyeball on something and hearing tones of different people on the radio. So I think there's something to what you're saying.
Well, that kind of brings us a little bit full circle. Obviously, top secret military operations need a level of secrecy. We're kind of back to what we talked about before, which is openness and transparency about doing stuff in communities and having relationships. And it's probably the hardest place to argue that that's a good thing is in state level secret intelligence gathering missions. But in other aspects of life, what are some of your thoughts on that for just regular life as we're going about our business? How can we get better maybe at the right kind of transparency, the right kind of openness, where we're still maintain the humility and still protect other people's information or privacy. Like there's people who work at T-Rex that I've had some amazing conversations with, and they don't want those conversations public. So obviously they're not gonna be the topics of the podcast. Is that something that we kind of need to figure out again as a culture or a society?
Yes, I think we do. Rob Dreher in his book talked about when people start using their inside voice, or they're being quiet in what they say, then you know that you're being affected. That you know, no longer is this some outside influence. It's actually affecting the way that you think and interact. So that kind of goes against being transparent, just like what you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It may be okay now, but since everything is collected now and can be used later against you, you do have to be more careful. But I think I think it takes some time and study, just for, let's say, for pastors, for example, to have some time and study and being confident in what you are saying, confident that this is actually what the scripture says. And then if you have that, then you can be transparent about it. And as Bodhi Bacham says, many times, hey, I didn't write the letter. I'm just delivering the mail, right? So there's in a sense, we're messengers of what the scripture is saying and what God is saying. So I think to be confident in it, and to be careful. I think there's some time for some contemplation. I mean, some building, some talking points. I think that probably every Christian in today's environment ought to be able to answer some basic questions. Some basic questions about origins of life, about why do you believe what you believe. What is the intersection of, and that's a bad word nowadays, but intersection of
Sure.
of religion and the civil magistrate. So I think that's one of the things that pastors need to be educating their congregation on is how do you have the public conversation. I think that's what we need to be doing also with our children, having them to, hey, walk me through that. Let's war game this. What are you going to say, and how are you going to say it? So maybe that'll help.
It's very interesting. There's nothing new under the sun, but there are some things that feel different today than I think that they have in history. And one of them is this conversation about privacy and security feels different than it did a long time ago. Like in the past, there wasn't really privacy on telephones. Like people were on a party line, and it didn't really matter that there wasn't privacy on the party line because everybody, A, knew that it was a party line, and B, knew all their neighbors and knew that they were listening. And it was okay that there wasn't privacy necessarily. And also because their neighbors couldn't really do anything. It's different when it is the federal government that collects all of the phone calls, and a lot of people don't know that their phone calls are being collected. That's where I think some problem comes in. And I think that is a relatively new situation that we haven't really run into before. We have to think through the ramifications of that. And then just kind of this weird situation where I know an awful lot of people who don't really have relationships in their community. And so most of their conversations are on Twitter and Instagram. Yeah. They have very few private conversations. Most of their conversations are on public platforms.
Yeah, that's not good. It definitely would be good to have a better balance with that. So how's that done? I mean, it's just getting out there, doing things like you were talking about, having the local businesses, shopping locally, getting to know people Um, it really, it's a mantra, but it's one of the things that everybody says. But really, most of your life is local, um, and maybe not most of your conversations are local, but most of your life still is local. You're still
Hmm.
dealing with the mailman and the person at the grocery store. And if you get into any type of law situation, there's definitely going to be, well, almost definitely going to be local people. Um,
Hmm.
so just to keep that in mind. But yeah, the as far as the government collecting things, you know, yeah, I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about the deliberate aspect of it, and I'm also concerned about the just what would be the accidental or technical aspect of it. So one of the things
Mm.
that we had a difficulty with when we were testing our surveillance equipment is how are you going to test it without actually, using it?
Mm.
And it was difficult to sort of turn the machine off or to remember to go back and delete the data. We were very conscientious about the fact, okay, it's illegal to collect on the United States citizens, right? But so there wasn't, at least where I was, a malintent to do that. But some of the technical aspects of it, there's just so much automatic now. It's hard to turn it off. So we just have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that there are very good and very important backup procedures that people are running so no data is ever lost. And that's great when you don't want data to be lost. But there's a lot of stuff that has been legally required to be deleted, and it's been backed up so capably and effectively that I'm confident that it has not been deleted. Like it's extremely recoverable. So yeah, we live in very interesting times for sure. And in some ways I feel a little hypocritical talking about the need for more private conversations on a podcast, which we're gonna post publicly. But I
Well,
do
yeah,
think that it's
we know each other though, as we're just having a
it's
conversation
true.
here. So,
Occasionally, I've had people on the podcast, and our discussion is the first time that we've ever had a discussion. But we've known each other for a long time and bumped into each other at conferences for years. And I'm going to see you at a conference next month, and so we have a number of private conversations that have led into this one. So. I think that is really ideal. I don't want to put a ratio on it, but I'm trying for my public content releases to be a tiny fraction of my actual conversation. My output should be, I feel like my output should be a very small percentage of my input, and then my public output should be a real small percentage of my private output. That's my theory. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the best stuff is what hits the public airwaves, but hopefully it makes it a little more likely.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, what recommendation? You mentioned that you were hoping to revive the podcast, but we can recommend that people look for this book, The Confessional County. I have to very carefully get it up so that the autofocus works properly. But The Confessional County is a book that I recommend for people who are thinking through some of these issues of community building. We've had a number of episodes of this podcast talking about community, different aspects of community, and I really appreciate your book on the subject. Is there anything else that people should be doing to keep up with what is going on, or stuff that you are doing?
Well, for us, I mean, I think that what I wanted to do is sort of lay out the theology. It's important, I believe, to have the theology of your actions. You don't want to have theology without action, and you don't want to have action without theology. You want those two things to get together. And so, like what you were mentioning earlier, people just leaving the city, I would encourage them to have an understanding of why. I would have an understanding of where they're going and why they're going, and what's the purpose of the particular place that they're going to. Because moving is difficult, it's expensive, and
Yeah.
you don't really want to do it a bunch. So try to understand and pray is what does the Lord want me to do? What is the Lord showing me from the Scripture? I I do think, and as part of my, I guess, public message, if you will, um, I do think that one of the greatest assets and abilities that we have today is the ability to move. And I do encourage, if I just look at the situation nationally and globally that Christians are in today, I would encourage a lot more moving. I would encourage getting to areas where we can unify, where we can have a numbers influence. There is nothing unfaithful or unbiblical about trying to have numbers. It is something that Jesus talked about, counting the cost and everything. But I really think that we, as Christians, need to be considering moving and putting our children into a place that's going to be the best for the long term. We may not be able to move for a long time, but right now mobility is pretty able. So I'm still encouraging, and I think I'm still going to keep encouraging people to consider moving your family to a better place.
Yeah. And all kinds of possibilities open up. I mean, T-Rex Arms is, I think we're just at 90 people right now. And that involved a number of people who were already here and a number of people who moved here to be a part of T-Rex. T-Rex couldn't be doing some of the things we were doing without folks moving here. And so it is an interesting freedom that we have. I think in the moment, there's not any countries where moving is expressly forbidden with the same kind of criminal penalties as like during the Iron Curtain days. But there are certainly a number of countries that make it extremely difficult to get out of the country, extremely difficult to get around inside of the country. So if that's a freedom that you have, I think that that is a good thing to be considering.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably, if the main thing that I see is prohibiting movement of people, over the next 10 years or something like that is not necessarily going to be legislation, but it's going to be economics. It's
yes, yeah.
It's costly to move, and so
yeah. And California is all out of moving trucks on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah,
so doesn't help. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to have this public conversation, Mr. Simmons. We've had a number of really interesting conversations in the past. I've tried to pull some interesting things that we've talked about, interesting things that you have written about and are working on. But also thank you for talking about the court case. That is a thing for people to be aware of so that they can avoid it, be aware of so that they can fight it, and be aware of so that they can kind of preemptively set up some better gun laws that serve the citizens and their neighbors, take better care of their neighbors, and don't open them up to these kind of accidental liabilities. So I appreciate you making that public, even though I'm sure that it's also kind of more comfortable not to.
I'm happy to do it.
Well, thank you so much. We will be in touch, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next month.
Sounds good, Isaac. Take care.
Thank you very much for watching this video. And if you're seeing this message and you're watching this video on YouTube, the brand new T-Rex Talk YouTube channel is still really hard for people to see. It's really hard to search for. So if you made it all the way to the end, please do us a favor. Don't just click like, subscribe, comment, and do all the social media platform stuff. Actually organically send this channel to other people because, for some reason, YouTube doesn't recommend it very much.